Welcome to the MultiCultural Mindset broadcast. Your host is Dr. Laverne Hanes Collins, a licensed professional counselor, award-winning trainer, and keynote speaker. Dr. Collins is the author of Overlooked: Counselor Insights for the Unspoken Issues in Black American Life. Dr. Collins has also been a featured monthly columnist in the American Counseling Association's Counseling Today magazine with her Honoring Diversity column. Now, here's Dr. Collins.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the MultiCultural Mindset, where we explore the topics of race, faith, culture, trauma, as relates to the mental health of people of color and other marginalized communities. I'm your host, Dr. Laverne Hanes Collins, and I'm so glad you decided to join in for today's podcast. Our goal is to present you with topics that help counselors grow out of the biased colonizer mindsets that don't serve our racially identified practice communities well. And instead, I want to help you grow into a multicultural mindset that makes your counseling culturally attuned for a diverse range of cultures and backgrounds. Today, I am specifically talking about how mental health professionals can support LGBTQ plus individuals from culturally conservative families. And within the communities representing people of color, we have many different value spectrums, backgrounds, conservative values, but oftentimes conservative family values clash seemingly and present real challenges for members of marginalized communities. And I am so happy today. I'm thrilled to have one of my sisterly colleagues in the counseling profession who is with us today, Dr. Tamika Hunter. She is a university professor. She's a researcher. She is an advocate. She is a mover and a shaker. She's an influencer. She's a thought leader, and she lives what she's talking about today. And I have so much respect for Dr. Hunter. So please just help me welcome Dr. Tamika Hunter. Thank you for being here, Tamika.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Well, it means a lot to have you here and your expertise being shared today with our listeners. I want to dive right in, Dr. Hunter.
Okay.
And I want to first ask if you can tell us your own story as a person living in multiple marginalized identities. What does that mean to you? What's your personal journey?
Well, I truly believe, as often is said, that personal is political, and it has to be for me, right? Because, some of the identities that are pretty obvious, you can see that I am a Black woman, right? Cisgender woman. But what you may not or you cannot see on camera right now is the fact that I also have a physical disability that is lifelong, so congenital, occurring at birth, disability, as well as I have a queer identity as well, being a pansexual person. So the complexity of living at multiple margins, it's been quite the journey. I remember being in high school and having a set of friends who also had physical disabilities like mine, young women, who we were talking about our futures, and I was so excited, and I would talk about, oh, I want to get, I want to be competitively employed because I've always liked to shop. I want to, priorities. So, and I wanted to have, buy a house and get married and do all of those kinds of traditional things. And I remember one of them piping up one day and saying, Tamika, do you really, you're Black, you have a disability, you're a woman, do you really think that you can do all those things? And something about the way she said it was like, no, you absolutely cannot. How dare you have this vision for your life? And I just remember, continuing to meet with them and being friends with them, but I remembered I would feel depressed. Like I would feel like, have I been unrealistic? Has my mother told me a bunch of stuff that's not really possible for me? You know, it had me questioning a lot of things. And then eventually I was like, well, maybe they don't think they can have that for their lives, but I believe that I can have this in my life. I believe what my mother tells me. I believe what my family tells me. I believe in God's purpose for my life. There's a reason why I show up in this body with these identities, with this personality. I think all of it is divinely ordered. So, yeah, but that was a that was kind of a trying experience, and I think, you know, from the queer identity standpoint, that one was a little tougher to integrate because in the back of my mind, I was like, me being a cisgender woman, me being Black, me having a physical disability that's very obvious. I use a power chair now, so you know, those things are obvious and there's nothing I can do about it. When I show up in the room, all of those identities come with me. But the queer identity wasn't one that people could readily guess or know. And so there was a part of me at a point that where I was like, okay, well, I can just hold this part back. But what I started to feel is incongruent. And like I wasn't practicing what I was preaching, right? If I value authenticity and wholeness, then I have to be whole myself. And so that is kind of what led me down the journey of multiply marginalized communities from a strengths-based perspective. Because part of my critique of the field of counseling is that we talk a lot about disparity, right? And we know that that's legitimate information. It's important for us to know. But at what point do we become purveyors of stereotype? Like we're not, there needs to be a balance in the literature about the strengths that are inherent in these communities as well. And so I think that there's too much attention to disparity and not enough to what are the strengths of each community, regardless of the social locations. Every community has strengths. And what can we do as clinicians to harness the research that we're doing, the knowledge gained from that, and apply it to our practices to make our communities' lives better? That's really, to me, the goal.
What a journey. What I can only imagine it takes to integrate all of you into a culture and a society that really from a very unfortunate colonizing history doesn't really value what any of your identities offer.
Exactly. It really says that I shouldn't exist, right? That's really what it says. We're not gonna put any supports in place for you to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially right now. And the supports that you did have, let's just take those away too. Let's just
exactly.
So given that, what are some of the unique mental health challenges that LGBTQ plus individuals from culturally conservative backgrounds may face? Mental health challenges.
Well, you know, for LGBTQIA plus communities from conservative backgrounds, there are some unique challenges, and they are, of course, societal stigma, right? The risk of familial rejection and internalized shame. There's a phenomenon often talked about when we're talking about like biracial and multiracial people, but it applies here to a cultural homelessness, right? When your family of origin rejects a part of who you are. So there is increased confusion, there's increased anxiety, isolation, and we know poor mental health outcomes. So those are unique challenges that this population faces, because we know that familial support is a protective factor to improve mental health. But if you don't have that, then the impact is greatly felt and quite negative.
Yes, yes. So how do you approach therapy when someone is struggling with, first of all, perhaps a level of internalized shame and that conflict? How do you approach therapy in that in that context?
First, we have to resist the desire to reframe the experience. Right? We talk a lot about reframing in counseling, right? But this is not something to reframe. It's something to validate, right? You validate that experience, right? And sometimes we need to hear somebody just say, well, that really sucks. I mean, we don't need the academic response, right? It's the human response, the human connection that makes the difference, as we know, the therapeutic alliance in counseling. So we first have to create a safe and affirming environment. So we're validating the client's experience, identities, and all of that. But also to, like I talked about, my queer identity, it was later, it took longer to integrate. We need to help clients be able to do that at their own pace while we address the internalized stigma, right? So we need to look at intersectional models of identity development as we do this, right? So if they have a sexual minority identity as well as a racially minoritized identity, we need to look at intersectional models of racial and sexual identity development as we work with these clients, ones that allow you also to address stigma, because the stigma may be not only external but internalized as well. So part of it is creating space and time to do both of those things.
Talk a little bit more, if you would, about the um, internalizing or internalized stigma, because I don't think that we give enough space, enough conversation to that. We sometimes talk about internalized racism, and we talk about other things, but this population is still expected to just kind of shh, shh, shh,
Yes,
shh.
right.
And
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And so with the internalized stigma, Lefevre et al. Did a great job in talking about this, but um, the internalized stigma is where you, the person who has the sexual minoritized identity or sexual expansive identity, start to believe the press, right? Start to believe the negative press about your deviance, that your identity is a sin against God, and all of those things. When that starts to be internalized, that's where we see, more suicidal behaviors, more substance use disorders, more risky sexual behaviors, survival sex and things like that. If you are like ostracized from your family, then those kinds of things start to come into play. So that's why it's going to be imperative that a therapist be not only affirming but able to create the space so that the client can actually talk about that stigma. And sometimes it takes a while to unearth it, because pushing it down is a coping mechanism to try to increase safety. So we need a therapist who can be patient and allow the client to kind of work through that stigma at their own pace.
Mhm. And wouldn't it be a shame to have someone go into therapy and do what, passing, so to speak, as the term was used whenever very light-skinned, light-complected African Americans or biracial Americans would pass for white. They would hide the Black identity, the Black part of their identity. Um, we can use passing for other identities that we hide too, can't we?
For sure, for sure. I mean, for sure, but there's a nuance here that I'd like to talk about. So I did a study in 2020 called Queering Disability, which is around sexual identity, and disability and chronic illness status. This can be extrapolated to racial identity as well. So it, the communities talked about this phenomenon of fragmentation, which meant that they could not bring their full selves to any environment, right? So we're talking about the larger community of queer people that includes majority culture, right? If you are a BIPOC person with a minoritized sexual identity, then you may not be accepted in that space because of your racial identity. And then in your racial identified community and family, you may not be accepted there because of your queer identity, right? And so that causes fragmentation. And we're trying to hide the parts that we can hide, right? As I talked about earlier in my own experience. However, here's the thing. The coming out is a white, patriarchal, cis phenomenon. Okay. The coming out is that. And so, because think of it this way, if you're a BIPOC person with a minoritized sexual identity, your family of origin, your community, your racial community, where you have that shared racial identity, helps you to navigate racism. If you and because we are Black people are generally relational, collectivist, spiritual, many of us religious, right? If you come out and then you lose that familial support economically, socially, and otherwise, how do you navigate the race piece, which is so prominent, especially right now? So great. Yes, we need to come out, but there's bigger risk for certain members of the community, which is the nuance that I want to share in coming out. And know that your identities are valid regardless of whether you come out or not. It may not be safe to do so. So the therapist also needs to be validating of the identity, whether it is known or not, and respecting the very real possibility of losing familial and community support based on one or both of those identities.
There's a lot at risk when you talk about loss,
right.
Because what I'm hearing is that you're in response to any identity that you own, there is likely to be some loss somewhere.
Yes, and
when those when those identities are not socially acceptable to
correct.
Others.
And so as a white gay person, you might deal with homophobia, right? But you're not dealing with the interlocking oppressions of homophobia and racism, which creates a whole new set of experiences that you cannot parse out about being oppressed. So, first recognize that coming out is not necessarily necessary. And they're just as valid, right? And part of it is that we need to explore as therapists with these clients, self-compassion, narrative therapy really works in these cases. And again, rather than trying to reframe, we want to validate the experiences. Because part of our wanting to reframe with this population is sometimes as a therapist, our own discomfort of not knowing what to say, what to say, or we may believe on some level, right? Deep down, we don't want to tell anybody, but we believe that God does not approve, right? So we don't know what to say. So then we're trying to make ourselves feel better. And that's not centering the client.
Wow. That's powerful, what you just said. As is, this part really got to me. It's not necessary to come out in the way that you said a white patriarchal cisgen male dominated mindset suggests. how many, well, I know we don't, hypothetically, how many therapists and counselors have encouraged people to come out over the years? Like that was come out. It's like, well, this is what you'll need to do in order to really feel centered in who you are, and to shake off any shame and stigma. But you're saying that that's not necessary to shake off shame and stigma.
No,
That
no,
is,
not necessary. That is
yeah,
a
that's
nuance.
a
That
that's a
is
whole
a
light bulb.
it's a privilege of coming out is a privilege afforded those with just one marginalized identity, particularly in majority white culture. That is a privilege
Mm,
because you're not
mm,
contending with racism on top of it. You're not
mm,
necessarily, if you're cisgender, dealing with transphobia on top of it. You're
mm,
not dealing with those things that already set us back economically and otherwise.
mm-hmm.
So it's a privilege to do that. And if you want to do that, that's great and fine, but that is not the answer for everyone. And it doesn't make those people or their identities any less valid.
You go to a mountaintop and just shout that part out. People have put therapists, in many cases, have put so much, I almost want to say pressure
Yes.
for toward that outcome, as if
Yeah.
that was the way to evolve.
Yeah, that's the pinnacle. That's the promised land for everyone. And no, there's a real
Mm,
risk. There's some real social, economic, and other risks involved in
yeah,
doing that. So
yeah,
recognize it's a privilege.
yeah. Wow. Thank you for that. I'm gonna just dive into one more quick question here before we wrap up. I could go on, I could talk to you all day, but I'm going to wrap up with this question of how can mental health professionals advocate for and create spaces that help a person manage the emotional abuse, um, and the estrangement that comes from family members or friends or
Mm-hmm.
whoever may be in their, whoever may represent their tribe or their village. And you feel estranged not just from family, but from entire family circles. What can therapists do to advocate for and help people who are struggling with such things?
So, supporting clients who fear rejection and abuse, first we have to assess, right? We have to assess social support. First, within the family, is there any evidence that any family member, any one family member, because it makes a difference to have at least one uh, family member who's safe, right? Look for the counter narratives in your family. Like, are there some people who Uncle Bobby was okay with? You notice that he was fine with this LGBTQIA neighbor, or just look for the counter narratives that might be in your family to
Mhm.
identify someone who's safe, because fear is very real, but sometimes fear can be a liar, right? And it make you believe you have no one and nothing. Okay,
Mhm.
so but if it's true that in your family there isn't anyone who is safe, which does happen quite a bit, then we go to move into assessing social support from chosen family. So where can you build community? Where can you build, your queer community? That's just as valid and helpful and supportive. And queer communities know, we know what we need, right? So we're able to support each other in ways that are uh, with greater depth because we live the experience. So chosen family, try to shore that up, figure out who those people are, especially if you have shared marginalized and multiply marginalized identities, because that can be a place of support. But also as the clinician, it's important that we can't just hand these clients a list of resources, right? We need to have done the work on the front end before those clients even come in to vet the resources, because just just saying that you're affirming doesn't necessarily mean that you are, right? So before you give out a list, you need to do the extra work and clinician of making sure that that is a vetted list, that you've done the work of vetting that list. You also want to help the client in, if they don't have a supportive family member, if possible, maintaining appropriate boundaries, not doing this blanket thing where that's your family, that's the only mother you have, that's the only father you have. If people are causing you harm, you don't owe them to maintain access to you, right? You don't owe anyone that, right? And I know that's hard, especially BIPOC communities, but it's the absolute truth.
Mhm.
So learning to maintain boundaries, effective communication, emotional regulation, coping with that kind of anticipatory grief, all these things are things that clinicians can help clients do. But I want to say something about allyship, right? Because I have a little bit of a beef, or it's actually a big beef with this concept. I believe that the title of ally is not one you proclaim. It is bestowed by the community. So when you're not in the room, does that community call you an ally? Right? So many people, I'm an ally,
Yes.
I'm an ally. Well, I can't tell. Okay.
What have you done for me lately, right?
And also this, exactly. You cannot truly be an ally, a true ally, a bestowed ally, if you are not willing to risk. So you have to risk your social capital. You have to risk people being angry with you. You have to risk your position. You have to risk your privilege. You have to give some pro bono and sliding scale services. You have to, so that's your pocketbook. You have to risk something, not just calling yourself an ally, because that to me is just performance.
Mm.
To make you feel better. That's not helping the community.
You're saying count the cost,
Yes, because there
count the
is,
cost,
if
and
you're really
then
an
be
ally.
willing to.
Exactly, exactly. So we need to move away from this self-proclaimed
Self-proclaim.
allyship to conspiratorship, co-conspirators, people that take up the battle when we're weak and we're tired, because it's happening often right now. So, we need somebody that is willing to risk their privilege. Because if you are not risking anything, if you say to me, well, my family's never going to change, you're not an ally.
Mm.
You are not an ally. I know you want to believe you are, but you're not,
Okay.
because you're risking nothing.
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 What an amazing invitation, Dr. Hunter. That's an
Yeah,
amazing invitation. It is an invitation to make a sacrifice.
that's right. Because that's what's required.
Yeah.
That's what's required. We're doing it every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what's
Ooh,
required.
powerful, powerful. And I thank you for all of that. Are there any other nuggets of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up today? There's so much in you. I know there's more, but
I
if you could
think
share.
we've covered what I wanted to share today. But certainly, if there are other things that come up, I'll share with you to
Thank you
share with your
so
audience.
much. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been enlightening. I feel challenged. I feel invigorated.
Good.
I feel like I have increased my understanding, my knowledge, but that happens every time I'm in your presence. So I thank you.
Likewise,
Thank
iron
you.
sharpens iron. So
Yes, amen to that. And I want to thank everyone who has joined in today for our episode on supporting LGBTQIA plus individuals within culturally conservative families and helping us think about how to incorporate that into our multicultural mindset. So if you work as a mental health professional, I hope this episode has encouraged you to look deeper into your practices. I hope this has encouraged you to challenge assumptions, even your assumptions about allyship, your assumptions about reframing, and so many other things that Dr. Hunter has challenged us with today. I hope that you will be more committed to developing a truly inclusive approach to therapy. And please know that doesn't mean that you have not already been working toward a truly inclusive and equitable approach to therapy with diverse populations. But she and I were talking before we went on air, both of us agreeing this is a lifelong journey, a lifelong
Absolutely.
process and evolution. So, as always, if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a review, share it with others who might benefit. I'm Laverne Hanes Collins signing off, and until next time, please keep practicing with empathy, humility, and a multicultural mindset. So long for now.
Bye.